I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped outside. The air felt different, too still, too quiet. No rustling leaves, no birds chirping, just an eerie silence hanging over my garden. My usual morning routine of sipping coffee and admiring my plants came to an abrupt halt when my eyes landed on an empty patch of soil. My tomatoes were gone. Not a single one left. No half-eaten remains, no trampled vines, not even a stray stem. It was like they had been erased from existence. For a second, I just stood there, staring at the empty space, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Then, the realization hit me like a brick. Someone had stolen them, and I was going to find out who. The morning after my tomatoes disappeared, I found myself standing by the garden, arms crossed, scanning the street like a detective piecing together a crime scene. The whole thing felt off. Whoever took them hadn't just plucked a few. They had cleared the entire patch. That wasn't hunger. That was intentional. Then, like clockwork, she appeared. Karen, the queen of the HOA, the enforcer of pointless rules. The woman who once handed out flyers on proper mailbox heights like she worked for some sort of curb appeal police. She strolled by, Princess trotting beside her, as if their morning walk doubled as a surveillance routine. Her eyes flicked toward my garden. The way she looked at the empty space made my skin itch. It wasn't just a passing glance. It was too knowing, too satisfied. She lingered for a second too long before turning to me with that painfully polite smile. "Oh dear," she sighed, placing a hand dramatically on her chest. "Still no tomatoes? That's just so unfortunate." She spoke like she was offering condolences at a funeral. I forced a chuckle. "Yeah, weird, right?" Her smile stretched wider. "Millimeter very. You know, gardening can be tricky. Some people just don't have the touch." The way she said it, like a mother scolding a child who couldn't color inside the lines, made my blood simmer. Then, before I could respond, she adjusted her cardigan, lifted her chin, and kept walking. Princess, as usual, gave me one final judgmental glare before trotting after her owner. I watched them disappear down the sidewalk, my grip tightening around my coffee mug. That was it. That wasn't a casual comment. That was a confession wrapped in fake concern. Karen had taken my tomatoes, and she wanted me to know it. But without proof, I had nothing. I couldn't exactly march up to her house and demand a confession. This was a woman who once held a 20-minute meeting about the dangers of overly festive Christmas decorations. She'd just gaslight me into oblivion. No. If I was going to call her out, I needed evidence. By lunchtime, I was at the hardware store, pretending to browse paint while discreetly Googling best home security cameras. I didn't need motion tracking or night vision, just something reliable. Something small enough to hide but sharp enough to capture a crime in progress. By evening, my backyard had a new, secret resident. A tiny, wireless camera, tucked neatly into the tomato bed, its lens positioned for maximum exposure. I stepped back, arms crossed, nodding in satisfaction. If Karen came for my plants again, this time, she wouldn't be leaving empty-handed. She'd be leaving on camera. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the security footage. My heart pounded as I fast-forwarded through the night. Leaves rustling. A stray cat wandering by. Nothing unusual. Then, movement. A figure crept into the frame. I paused the video, squinting at the screen. The shape was familiar, but the grainy night vision made it hard to tell. I pressed play again, watching as the person stepped closer to the garden, their outline becoming clearer. And there she was, Karen, wearing an oversized straw hat, a pastel cardigan, and, of course, her signature Crocs. She looked around 3 times before stepping over the edge of my garden bed. She moved quickly but carefully, reaching down with gloved hands, plucking tomatoes like she was shopping at a farmer's market. I watched in disbelief as she stuffed them into a reusable grocery bag slung over her shoulder, occasionally pausing to scan the area like some kind of suburban jewel thief. My jaw clenched. This wasn't a one-time crime of opportunity. This was planned. Executed. She had a system. She turned toward my house one last time, paused, smiled. Then she walked off like nothing happened. I sat there, phone still in hand, watching the playback over and over. Each time, my emotions shifted, from shock to anger, then to something else entirely. Laughter. It was so ridiculous. Karen, the same woman who had once threatened to fine someone for planting unauthorized sunflowers, was out here sneaking around stealing tomatoes in the dark like some rogue produce bandit. I couldn't keep this to myself. I grabbed my phone and sent the footage straight to Jerry, my neighbor. Within seconds, my phone lit up with his reply. "No way. I'm crying. She really did it. She really stole your tomatoes." A few moments later, another message. "Dude, we have to do something about this." He wasn't wrong. I could confront Karen directly, but she'd deny everything. Maybe even twist it around, claim I was harassing an HOA member or violating some nonsense privacy rule. No, this needed to be handled differently. I leaned back, tapping my phone against my palm, trying to figure out the perfect response. And then, out of nowhere, a video popped up in my suggested feed. A spicy pepper challenge. Some poor guy on screen had just taken a bite of what the caption called "The world's hottest pepper." His face went red, eyes wide, hands waving frantically as he gasped for air. People in the background were screaming with laughter. A slow smile spread across my face. Karen wanted tomatoes? Fine. I'd give her exactly what she wanted. The plan was simple. Replace the stolen tomatoes with something Karen wouldn't forget. I drove straight to the local nursery, trying to act normal as I asked the employee where they kept their hottest peppers. The guy gave me a knowing look and led me to a shelf lined with seedlings, each labeled with warnings in bold red letters. I ran my fingers over the tiny labels: Carolina Reapers, Ghost Peppers, Trinidad Scorpions. Each one boasted a heat level that could probably melt steel. But I wasn't looking for just any spice. I needed something deceptively sneaky. Ghost peppers. Perfect. They looked just like cherry tomatoes when ripe. Bright, plump, innocent. But inside? Pure fire. I grabbed a few seedlings, threw in some fertilizer for good measure, and checked out, ignoring the cashier's raised eyebrow. Back home, I got to work. I carefully dug holes in my garden, spacing them strategically between the remaining tomato plants. I had to make sure they blended in perfectly. Couldn't have Karen getting suspicious. As I knelt in the dirt, my neighbor Jerry strolled over, hands in his pockets, watching with curiosity. "Let me guess," he said. "You're not planting normal tomatoes, are you?" I grinned. "Nope." His eyebrows shot up. "Oh, this is gonna be good." He squatted down beside me, inspecting the tiny plants. "You sure about this?" I patted the soil down. "She wants to steal my tomatoes? Fine. She can have these ones." Jerry chuckled, shaking his head. "You're an evil genius, man. Just make sure you don't forget which ones are which. You don't want to make a mistake later." He had a point. So I stuck tiny, color-coded tags next to each plant, red for tomatoes, black for peppers. No way was I going to accidentally poison myself. For the next 2 weeks, I became a dedicated gardener. I watered them, checked the soil daily, and even talked to them like some kind of plant whisperer. It felt ridiculous, but I needed them to grow fast. One afternoon, while tending to my devious little project, I made a critical mistake. I wiped sweat off my forehead right after handling a ghost pepper leaf. Instant regret. A slow burn spread across my skin, then turned into a raging fire. My eyes watered, my forehead tingled, and panic set in. I scrambled for the hose, blasting my face with water like I was under chemical attack. Jerry, watching from his porch, nearly fell over laughing. "Bro," he wheezed. "You just pepper sprayed yourself." I groaned, blinking through the stinging. "Shut up." Lesson learned. Always wear gloves when handling hot peppers. A few days later, the ghost peppers finally ripened. They looked perfect, shiny, bright red, and nestled among the tomato plants like they belonged there. If you didn't know better, you'd never suspect a thing. And right on cue, Karen made her move. I was out front when I spotted her down the sidewalk, pretending to be on a casual stroll. But I knew better. She slowed exactly in front of my yard, hands clasped behind her back, eyes flicking toward the garden. I sipped my coffee, acting oblivious. "Morning, Karen." She forced a smile. "Oh, good morning. How's the gardening coming along?" I shrugged. "Not bad. Decided to try something new this year." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh? What kind of tomatoes?" The way she asked made it obvious. She was considering another heist. I smiled. "Oh, just a little variety." She lingered a moment too long, then flashed that fake smile before walking away. I barely held back my grin. She had no idea what was waiting for her. That night, I made sure my camera was rolling. If Karen was going to steal from me again, I was going to catch every second of it. And this time, it was going to be legendary. The moment had arrived. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, refreshing the live feed from my hidden camera. My heart pounded as I scanned the screen, waiting for the thief to strike again. And then, movement. There she was. Karen. She crept into the garden with the grace of a burglar in broad daylight. Her oversized hat pulled low, her cardigan sleeves rolled up as if this was some kind of serious operation. The grocery bag was slung over her shoulder again, ready for another haul. I leaned in closer, gripping my phone tighter. She glanced around, once, twice, 3 times, then stepped onto my lawn. Her movements were smooth, practiced. This wasn't her first time. She knew exactly where to go. She reached out, fingers brushing against the ghost peppers disguised among the tomatoes. No hesitation. No second guessing. I grinned. She plucked one, examined it briefly, then tucked it into her bag. Then another. And another. My pulse raced. She turned, walking back toward the sidewalk, her prize secured. But then, she stopped. I frowned at the screen. She pulled one of the tomatoes from her bag, holding it between her fingers. The way she examined it, I could practically hear her thoughts. Was she admiring it? Checking for ripeness? And then, she did it. Without warning, without hesitation, she took a bite. I froze. For a second, nothing happened. Then, her entire body stiffened. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. Her mouth stopped moving. Then came the first exhale. A short, sharp burst of air, like she'd swallowed fire and just realized it. She clutched her throat. Her face went from slight confusion to pure horror. Then, chaos. Karen lurched forward, dropping the rest of the pepper onto the sidewalk like it was radioactive. Her hands flailed in front of her like she was trying to push the heat away. She gasped, then coughed, then gagged. And then, the screaming began. It started as a low whimper, but quickly escalated into a full-blown wail. Her legs buckled, and she stumbled backward, arms outstretched, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for oxygen. I buried my face in a pillow, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. She spun in circles, arms waving frantically, before making a mad dash for the nearest source of water, my garden hose. She fumbled with the nozzle, fingers shaking. Water exploded everywhere. Onto her face, her cardigan, her hat, everywhere except her mouth. She tried to drink from the hose, but the pressure was too strong, sending a jet of water straight up her nose. I fell off the couch. Meanwhile, Princess the poodle was losing her mind. The tiny dog barked uncontrollably, circling Karen as if trying to figure out what kind of demonic possession was happening. And then, the neighbors came out. Mr. Johnson from across the street stood on his porch, newspaper in hand, eyebrows raised. The Wilsons peeked over their fence, whispering. Jerry, my neighbor, stepped onto his lawn, mouth open, phone in hand, already recording. Karen, now fully drenched and hysterical, turned toward the street, still coughing, still fanning her tongue, still making sounds I had only ever heard in horror movies. And then, she ran. No, not walked, not hurried. She full-on sprinted down the street, arms flailing, legs kicking up water, screaming about poisoned tomatoes and criminal gardening. I was done. Tears streamed down my face as I wheezed from laughter, clutching my stomach. Jerry had to sit down. He was laughing so hard, he could barely hold his phone steady. And then, the final cherry on top. As she ran past old Mr. Johnson, she snatched the newspaper out of his hands, desperately fanning her mouth with it, as if that would somehow make the fire go away. Mr. Johnson just blinked. What? By the time she disappeared from sight, the entire neighborhood was either watching or recording. And I was already replaying the footage. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast, and by the time I stepped outside to water my plants, people were already grinning at me like I had just pulled off the greatest prank in history. Jerry walked over, shaking his head, still chuckling. "Dude," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "I thought nothing could top the HOA Christmas decoration drama last year. But you raised the bar." I smirked, glancing at my garden. "She wanted tomatoes." Jerry snorted. "She got a full-course meal of regret. But I should have known better." Karen wasn't the type to take an L and move on. Less than 24 hours after her ghost pepper meltdown, an official HOA complaint landed on my doorstep. Thick envelope. Bold lettering. The kind of paper that screamed, "We're about to waste your time with nonsense." I sighed, ripped it open, and started reading. Notice of violation. Unsafe gardening practices. Unsafe? I blinked. I kept reading. It has come to the attention of the HOA that a resident has been cultivating hazardous plants in a communal living environment, endangering public health and safety. This matter will be addressed in an official HOA hearing scheduled for. I stopped reading. I already knew who was behind this. Karen. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted to weaponize the HOA against me. I ran a hand down my face. Of course she wasn't done. I had embarrassed her in front of half the neighborhood. No way was she going to let this go. She couldn't fight me head on, so she was trying to bury me in HOA bureaucracy. Fine. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one. The evening of the meeting, I arrived at the community center early. The room was already filling up, residents whispering, exchanging glances. Karen sat at the front, sunglasses perched on her nose, arms crossed like she was expecting a public apology and a fruit basket. I took my seat, calm, composed. The HOA president cleared his throat. "We're here to address a complaint regarding..." Karen cut in. "A public health violation." She turned to face the room dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. I was poisoned. A few neighbors stifled chuckles. Karen ignored them. It could have been anyone. A child. An innocent bystander. A pet. Jerry whispered under his breath. A poodle's life was at stake. I held back a laugh. Karen stood up, pacing. This was malicious. Deliberate. I have suffered immensely because of this reckless behavior. She dabbed at non-existent tears. I watched, unimpressed. Then, she turned on me. This menace, she actually pointed, planted illegal crops in our peaceful neighborhood. I raised an eyebrow. Illegal? She waved a piece of paper in the air. According to municipal guidelines, any highly hazardous plant varieties must be. I cut her off. Karen. I leaned forward. Do you even know what I planted? She faltered. It was. I crossed my arms. Ghost peppers. Perfectly legal. Read the city code. Silence. The HOA president shifted in his chair. Karen, do you have proof that this was intentional harm? Her mouth opened, then closed. Then, her desperation kicked in. I have testimony, she announced, from a horticulture expert. She yanked another envelope from her purse like it was some kind of legal death blow. I waited. She dramatically handed it to the board. The HOA president opened it, skimmed the paper, and then sighed. Karen, this is a Wikipedia printout. The room burst into laughter. Karen's face went pale. I let the moment settle before calmly pulling out my own evidence. A USB drive. I placed it on the table. This is footage of Karen trespassing onto my property and stealing from my garden, multiple times. Karen's head snapped toward me. That's a lie. I shrugged. Play the video. The HOA president plugged it in. The screen lit up. And there she was. In full color. Hat. Cardigan. Crocs. Busted. The moment she saw herself on the big screen, her entire demeanor changed. She tried everything, calling it fake, blaming deepfakes, even claiming someone else must have been wearing her outfit. Nobody bought it. By the time the video ended, the verdict was clear. The HOA president cleared his throat. Karen, given this evidence of trespassing and the lack of legal grounds for your complaint, we're dismissing your claims. Karen froze. And, he continued, you are hereby issued a formal warning for property violations. Any further complaints must be legitimate and backed by actual evidence. She looked like she might explode. The room erupted in quiet murmurs, some neighbors shaking their heads, others nodding in approval. Jerry leaned over. You just ruined her career. I smirked. What career? Karen stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled over. This isn't over, she hissed. I grinned. Good, I said. Because I'm just getting started. The neighborhood felt different after that night. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, had vanished. No early morning patrols. No passive-aggressive emails about unsightly lawn ornaments. No smug little comments during her daily walks. It was quiet and peaceful. For the first time in years, people actually relaxed without worrying about her lurking around with a clipboard, ready to report the slightest violation. Jerry summed it up best when he strolled over one afternoon, hands in his pockets, shaking his head. I gotta say, man, he chuckled, I think you just freed the people. I grinned. Didn't expect to start a revolution, but hey, here we are. Karen's disappearance. At first, Karen avoided me completely. If she was out for a walk and saw me coming, she'd cross the street like I was contagious. If we happened to be in the same grocery aisle, she'd suddenly remember she needed something on the opposite end of the store. And her email complaints? Gone. Not a single violation notice since the HOA meeting. No warnings about improper trash can placement. No concerns about seasonally inappropriate wreaths. It was beautiful. Then, one day, she disappeared completely. Rumors spread fast. Some said she had been so embarrassed that she put her house up for sale overnight. Others claimed she had a meltdown at another HOA meeting and decided to leave before she could be voted out. Whatever the truth was, the for sale sign appeared in her yard within weeks. The Karen era had officially ended. The neighborhood's new obsession. But here's the funny part. After the whole ghost pepper incident, gardening took over the neighborhood. People who had never planted a single thing suddenly had thriving vegetable patches. Lawns once perfectly uniform and dull were now full of tomato plants, peppers, herbs, and even sunflowers. The Wilsons, an older couple who never spoke much, started growing their own chilies. Jerry, once a bare minimum lawn guy, built a whole greenhouse. Even Margaret, the HOA secretary, started experimenting with spice levels. It's funny, Jerry said one day, inspecting his pepper plants. Karen tried to shut down your garden, and now the whole neighborhood's turning into a farmer's market. I laughed, shaking my head. Poetic justice. The final twist. One evening, as I was watering my plants, Jerry wandered over, a mischievous grin on his face. All right, he said, leaning on the fence. You got her good. But tell me, what's next? I raised an eyebrow. Next. He nodded. You can't just stop now. This was legendary. You set the bar. What's hotter than a ghost pepper? I smirked, glancing at my garden. Well, I said, I might just have to find out.